My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask you for pardon of my sins and grace to make this time of prayer fruitful. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. Today's Gospel tells us something a bit embarrassing about the apostles. It begins off by telling us that an argument started between the disciples about which of them was the greatest. Imagine the scene. The apostles and maybe some of the others, the disciples, are with them, and they're saying things like maybe Peter saying, well, Jesus compared me to a rock, so I must be the most solid of us all. And John saying, well, I'm clearly cleverer than the rest of you. And Nathanael saying, well, Jesus said, in me there is no guile. And so on, and comparing themselves, but actually openly. Something that we don't do so much these days. We keep these kind of thoughts to ourselves. But this turns into a full-blown argument between the apostles when they think that Jesus can't hear them. Now, we learn immediately from this something about ourselves, which is that so often our arguments, our disputes with our friends, our colleagues, or with family members is produced by nothing less than our pride. Often because we're making these silly comparisons with each other. We're puffed up because we think, well, I'm greater, I'm clever, I'm whatever, more than the others. I'm essentially bigger. And the funny thing that this produces is, well, it's not very funny, it's sadness. It always produces sadness because we always will get a reality check, a land. Somehow, reality just has that way of sneaking back up on us and hitting us over the head. And then we realize, gosh, how pompous that was, or how deluded I was. Even the Greeks talked about this. Aesop, in one of his fables, he tells the story of a wolf leaving his lair one evening in fine spirits and with an excellent appetite, Aesop tells us. And as he's going along, the sun is setting and it casts his shadow far, far out on the ground. And it looks as if he is 100 times bigger than he really was. And so he exclaims proudly, wow, see how big I am. Fancy me running away from a puny lion. Well, I will show him who is fit to be king. And just as those thoughts are going through his mind, along comes a lion, no less, sneaks up behind him, blots out him and his immense shadow completely, because the lion is much, much bigger in reality than him, and strikes him down with a single blow. And that's the end of our poor wolf. Somebody said that the failure to accept the reality of our life, in other words, that we you and I, we flash or we oscillate between pride and its kind of companion, which is depression about ourselves. And we oscillate, we go swinging from delusions of grandeur to delusions, I suppose, of complete inadequacy. And we're swinging. One day we're up like the lion, like the wolf, and then we're hit by reality, like the lion hitting the wolf. And this person says that the failure to accept the reality of our life is a cause of worry, of tension, and discomfort. And that always threatens our happiness. And it shows itself, this discontent about ourselves, ultimately. It can often produce kind of complexes, rebellions, envies, comparisons, or as we see with the disciples, even full-blown arguments. And underlying this is a kind of dissatisfaction with what we really are, which is caused by our pride. Jesus, you know that there's really nothing worse than pride. And when you realize what is going on in your apostles, that they're all getting kind of puffed up, well, then you intervene. And the gospel tells us Jesus knew what thoughts were going through their minds, and he took a little child and set it by his side, and then said to them, "Anyone who welcomes this little child in my name welcomes me, and anyone who welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me." So very, very striking, a real object lesson. This small child by the side of Jesus. And our Lord saying, essentially our Lord saying, I am a child. And we also have to be children. In what way do we have to be children? Not by being childish, but by being childlike. Don't allow yourself, me neither, I shouldn't allow myself to become pompous. When we think of that what we do, what we say is so important, we end up being like a snail described by John Paul I, the little snail of vainglory, who had crawled up an obelisk, looked back at its slimy trail and said, I see, I'll leave my mark on history. Jesus goes on saying to his apostles, he says, for the least among you, all, that is the one who is great. That's quite something to say. The least, he or she is really the greatest. How do we become the least without doing anything strange? And I think one of the ways that we do it, or maybe the most important way, is that when we're doing things or saying things or just living our life, let us live our life to impress God. Not doing things to impress others, as in make them impressed with us. Rather, try to impress God and nobody else. And that's the real recipe for peace, because if we're praised, well, it doesn't matter. If we're criticized, it doesn't matter. We were working for God. There's another story, a little story by Tolstoy, told by John Paul I, and it's about a cook called John, who's working for a king. He's the cook for a king, and this is the way that John Paul I sums up the story. He says that the king's cook, John, was working in his kitchen, preparing a meal for the king. Outside the kitchen door, the dogs were lying. John, the cook, slaughtered a calf and threw the entrails into the yard. The dogs fell on them and said, he is a good cook. He cooks really well. Sometime after that, John was shelling peas, peeling onions, and he threw the husks into the yard. The dogs rushed over, but sniffing scornfully, they said, the cook is spoiled. He is worthless now. John, however, was not upset by this opinion. He said, it is the master who must eat and enjoy my meals, not the dogs. The master's appreciation is enough for me. It's a wonderful little story. And it's about something that we call rectitude of intention. Our intention is rectified, it's upright. And that intention is, I want, ultimately, to please God. And if I'm doing that, at least I think I'm doing that, well then, if other people are happy, great. If they're not happy, well, that's unfortunate, but it doesn't matter, because we're pleasing God. And that is the small one, the little one, that Jesus has at his side. You think of a small child, really, I suppose very often they only really want to impress their mother and their father. That's all they have in their mind. And once they impress their mother or their father, once the mother or their father is happy with them, they are happy. And so our Lord is saying the same to us. Look, don't get all uptight and stressed and in a heap about what you think others think about you. You will be good at some things and not so good at other things. Myself, the same. And that's it. C'est la vie. Do things for the love of God, to impress God. And that would bring with it a great contentment. I give you thanks, my God, for the good resolutions, affections, and inspirations you have communicated to me in this meditation. I ask you for help to put them into effect. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.